Good evening. I'd like to welcome all the people who have registered for this event and obviously to our speakers too. We thought of celebrating the World Olive Tree Day of the UNESCO with this conference. This is just the beginning of a very long development that will unfold across over the next 5 to 6 months to tell about olives and olive trees from every possible respect. It's an ambitious project called Terra Madre Olive that stemmed from a major teamwork between Slow Food Italy, the local branches in the Mediterranean and Middle East, and all the slow food regions and regional groups that are involved in this subject. I am Monica Petronio, and I'm a spokesperson for Slow Food Apulia, and I'm working with other regions across Italy. So together with a group of experts that is cooperating with the Slow Food Editore Guide, we would like to put our knowledge, expertise, and skills within the organization at the disposal of the people who wanted to participate in the unfolding of this olive tree project. Now, olive trees make landscapes, are biodiversity, they make revenues, they are cultural symbols, religious symbols, they are food, fluid food and solid food, olives and olive oil. And it's been a key element, a pillar in the history of mankind, including through the leftovers that you make from productions from the olive tree. Now, what we want to do through this project is to educate and support advocacy developments. So hopefully, we'd like to see a lot of you following this conference. You can also write your questions on the chat. I'd like to start by saying that olive trees have been markers of civilization with many ancient populations and civilizations. The fact of being civilized was marked by the cultivation of olives, vines, and grains. But among all three, olive trees are the longer lasting plants that have therefore shaped landscapes. Grains only last one season. Vines are not so long lived, and very often vines can be need to be supported by other plants, trees, or espaliers and supports. So in terms of landscape, olives are the longest lived markers of the environment. But all three foods that come from these three sources are understood as being part of civilization because they require some human action to transform them into something edible. In the Greek antiquity, these three plants were sacred to the gods, and the olive tree was too devoted to deities, and the agricultural landscape of certain regions are marked by this cultural marker, which is also landscape marker. And we need to give credit to people who have been able to plant it and cultivate it across climates, geographies, and seasons. I'd like to start talking about that with Professor Barbera, who is a tenured professor at the University of Palermo, and where he teaches tree cultivation. So I'll leave it to him to discuss this topic. After Professor Barbera, who will just give us a framework within which we're going to discuss the rest, we'll listen from other speakers who will discuss specific situations and circumstances where olive trees were planted or were at a risk of disappearing. The speakers will be accompanied by short videos that we received from our network, and we just picked a few because we could not show them all, but they will all be available in a Terra Madre page, web page. This being said, I'd like to leave the floor to Professor Barbera. The floor is yours, Professor. Okay, I keep forgetting to turn on my microphone. Anyway, I'd like to share my screen to show to you a few slides, and then we'll follow on with your words and videos so that we get a more comprehensive picture of the subject we're discussing today. Sorry, I was just looking for the document. I hope you can hear me. Of course we do. Can you please confirm that you can hear me? You know, just seeing a screen like that always makes you uncomfortable. Now, while Monica was giving an introduction, I was looking at your faces and reading your names, and also knowing about the coming speeches. I thought again of a Greek philosopher, perhaps Plato or someone else, I cannot remember who it was, who said that we around the Mediterranean were all like ants and frogs that keep moving all the time, that keep exchanging and talking to each other, trading with each other, exchanging and fighting with each other. And I like to think that we like to be in that role under the shade of olive trees. The slide that many of you may have seen before demonstrates the presence of wild and cultivative olive trees along the coasts of the Mediterranean in the ancient times. The borders of the conflicts in the Mediterranean area were solved thanks to the olive trees. In the big problem, the big issue of relationships between man and nature in the Mediterranean and the landscape, so nature and history coming together in the form of a landscape, is defined by the presence of olive groves. That reminds us that together with grains, wheat especially, and wine, and vines, that is the definition of our civilization. That has led to complex landscapes where oftentimes olive trees were the only rigorously Mediterranean crops that belonged to our history from the very beginning. This is a view over the city of Palermo, where I live, and you see Asian plants, American plants, Australian plants, and side by side with them, an old olive tree that demonstrates very forcefully the fact that it belongs there. Now, when confronted with that diversity in history and nature, because that's what the Mediterranean is all about, it's been about the encounter of different histories, civilizations, and so on. Now, in that encounter, the landscapes became diversified, although they contained, most often than not, olive trees. You see a number of examples. You see the Mediterranean shrub, top left, and then you see different landscapes that have developed in different habitats. It's different systems that have developed against the backdrop of different agricultural landscapes. And olive trees play different roles depending on where it is planted. In the past, olive trees were used to support vines. Then it were intercropped with other crops, and they can create real forests. And there are spaces for agroforestry, which are all the same agricultural spaces. And then the big olive trees, the large olive trees of Calabria in southern Italy, or the olive trees that just are creepers on the ground in the Isles of Pantelleria, the Greek olives just on the sea, on the beach, and the olive trees in northern Italy, which at the foot of the Alps during the winter time are shrouded in snow. The big olive trees in intercropping systems, wind-breaking barriers made of olive trees, the olive trees that we needed to we needed to learn to live with, which are planted intensively. I think that essentially there are three main models in all of that. Across these 13 pictures that I have shown, I mean, you can group them into three different models. One is traditional olive growing, which has been almost unchanged and has remained such for thousands and thousands of years. And it is a multifunctional cultivation, very often on dry, difficult soils, sometimes very steep, that have forced humans to rearrange the land at a very high cost. And at least in terms of the footprint, and in statistical terms, this kind of agriculture is very often abandoned. That is part of the depopulation of the countryside and the urbanization of rural population, with all the consequences that come from the fact that these areas are abandoned and left to themselves. This is a form of agriculture which is as ancient as Mediterranean agriculture, which is now facing a dire crisis. Despite all of that, however, this is the type of olive growing that really meets modern criteria still today. And perhaps there will be time to discuss this on a different occasion. But the multifunctional agriculture and olive growing in that setting is capable not only of providing a revenue and adopting technologies, but it can favor a number of additional possible uses of the same spaces, of course, for economic exploitation and to make a livelihood, but more generally, that preserves agricultural and cultural aspects in many forms. It helps preserve the identity of the peoples who live on agriculture, and all the way to the forms of other exploitation of these landscapes for tourism and for other uses. In scientific literature in Italy, all of this started to change at a specific point in time, 1968. 1968 was a time of big upheavals and revolutions, and it was a revolution for olive growing. 1968 was when researchers said we should no longer favor these mixed systems, and we should intensivise. That's when intensive olive groves started coming into existence. And that makes it easier to cultivate them, to maintain them, to pick the olives. And that was also when a different soil management with irrigation began. So these intensive plantations of up to 500 trees per hectare, could be anywhere between 100 to 500 plants per hectare, began in that way and gave higher yields. But what changed then was not so much the landscape, but the technique used to produce oil. Now, the true revolution was a technological one. People learned how to make olive oil in a more cost-effective way. They improved the picking techniques, of course. They improved the machinery to mill olives, and the quality of oil also improved. But that was not enough, because then a third model developed in olive tree cultivations, and that's in the last two slides. It's the most prevalent system, and because it became very successfully, it was initially very successfully adopted in Spain. It's a Spanish model, which is based on a very narrow genetic diversity. So actually a very small number of varieties, olive varieties, and a planting density up to 2,000, 2,500 trees per hectare, and a very strong very pervasive mechanization of the olive groves, especially mechanization of the olive harvesting operations. And that was the big innovation of super intensive olive growing, as it is often defined. Although it does resolve a few issues, such as the financial issues and technological issues, this form of agriculture poses a few other problems that are not secondary. I think, Professor, that you have already very well defined the three models that set like the boundaries within which we're going to discuss the olive tree landscape. Just one last concept before I close. Since we're talking about super intensive agriculture, let's go back to Italy, and I hope this is not going to happen in other countries as well, because this is a problem that we are seeing now in Apulia, because of the bad relationship between humans and nature. And I think this should be discussed thoroughly. It's the issue with the Xylella epidemic. This is semi-intensive olive growing. It is suffering for a number of reasons. And the risk now is that the landscape will now have to change when the olive trees are replanted, because they are no longer to be functional from an agroecological standpoint, nor from a landscape perspective. We'll now hear from the other speakers, and maybe there will be time to discuss this again and further at the end. Thank you very much also for your ability to summarize everything very, very well. So we have a mixed intensive and semi-intensive series of techniques that we've understood have all a time and space associated with them. We'll now continue moving on to Turkey, and I'm going to leave the floor to Dicle Kilic, who's a researcher and the chairwoman of an environmentalist conservationist NGO and the contact person of the Slow Food Presidium of the Aegean Indigenous Landscape Olive Oil. The floor is yours, Dicle.
Okay, sorry. I forgot to unmute myself. Can you hear me now? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I had some technical problems, but I hope I have solved. And thank you for this chance to speak with you about our ancient olive productions work. Actually, I'm from Nature Society, and we are a national society, which is a grassroots society, and we are mainly working on nature rights. And since we established almost 20 years, we actually concentrated on mostly biodiversity and ecosystems. And as we all see in this era, the modern techniques, modern conservation almost failed. Our methods are mostly unsuccessful. We are still losing our biodiversity and ecosystems very fastly. So some couple of years ago, we actually moved our headquarters of association to the Aegean part of Turkey and one of the villages in Izmir. And we started to live in a village which is surrounded by olive pastures and different kinds of ecosystems like pine forest. And then we actually started to look for new perspective for nature conservation, and we were looking for new methods and not the methods like the thinking the nature and biodiversity apart from a culture. And then we realized that we are actually living in a really special ecosystem, which is done by human hand and from a couple of actually, let me say, these olive pasture ecosystems actually mankind, but it's almost produces an ecosystem, and it preserves biodiversity, and it gives us olive and other edible plants, and also it feeds our animals. We use these landscapes for grazing. So we call these ecosystems indigenous production landscapes, and we have different examples in Anatolia, and we just generating this methodology and criteria, what kind of criteria this kind of production landscapes should get. So the olive pastures are the best example is in the Aegean. So we start working on olive pastures, and we started survey of biodiversity and how these productions actually generate an ecosystem and support the biodiversity as well as the, the food system of our agriculture and animal stocking. So our presidium story started like this. And nowadays, actually, we are dealing with some problems. We have so many threats on our this special olive production landscapes. And first of all, an intensive modern olive production is growing. So new types of olives started to bring to our region, and they used fertilizers, they used fences, and they actually cutting the ecosystems. So this is one of the main threats. And another risk on these special landscapes is energy projects, and especially geothermal energy projects are rapidly increasing in our region, especially in Izmir and Aydın. So many local communities are fighting them, and as an NGO, experienced NGO, we are also fighting these kind of projects, and we are helping also other local people, other olive communities, let me say, and we try to establish a network because we have already started to establish a network for presidium producers, and we try to preserve not only these producers and production landscapes, but all this landscape as a whole, and we try to stop all these kind of projects like energy, like mining. So I think it's all I have to say in 7 minutes, and thank you for supporting our job and community.
Thanks a lot. Really, thank you for underscoring one of the many threats and problems that our olive trees are running in the Mediterranean and wherever they are planted. And other exploitation practices may exact a toll on these cultivations. Now we're going to move to Spain. We have a video that we have received from the Olive Oil Network that we're going to watch.
I'm from Córdoba, a small village in South Spain. It's difficult for me to describe what olive means because it represents many different things. It's tradition, it's culture, its origin, but even its hard work. My life is linked to this crop because I belong to an olive farmer's family. So my first steps were around olives. In my region, olive groves predominate in the mountain landscape, as you can see. And picudo is the local cultivar which provides special characteristics to our extra virgin olive oils, highly recognized around the world. Also, my professional life is linked to this crop because I'm an agronomist, specialist in olive growing and oil technology. But nowadays, I'm doing my PhD at the Andalusian Institute of Agriculture Research. I'm working in a breeding program. I'm into obtain new cultivars resistant to verticillium wilt, which is a fungal disease highly spread in olive groves. This work gives me the opportunity to study and learn more about olive tree and olive oil. Both of them equally amazing for me. In essence, olive is part of my identity. It has been in my past, it's in my present, and I hope it will be in my future.
Ecco, questo è il messaggio che ci è piaciuto di più, una
So
storia che...
this is the message that we really liked among all those that were sent to us. So we're lucky to have so many young researchers, be it here in Italy or elsewhere, that are going back to their olive farming traditions. And devoting their lives to the development of what is present, protection, and the development of the future of olive cultivation. I will now leave the floor to Nacho Landerer, a professor of agricultural studies and the contact person of the slow food extra virgin olive oil from the millennial trees.
Thank you, Monica. I want to share my presentation. Okay. First of all, thank Slow Food for their invitation and their work, and say hello to Terra Madre and to my olive tree colleagues. My name is Nacho Landerer, and I speak on behalf of the Presidium of Millenary Olive Oil from País Maestrat in Castellón, Spain. I'm going to explain the origin of the product and its connection with the landscape. The Presidium arose at a time of total lack of protection for the ancient olive trees of the region, and were both and uprooted en masse and transferred to other places. Some people in the area, farmers who didn't want to sell these olive trees, considered this a plunder of their heritage and worked for their protection. This drama is reflected in the film El Olivo, in which the producers of the Presidium had a direct implication in the construction of the script. Everything I'm going to explain is included in the Presidium production protocol that was worked by Hilary, a farmer and an oil producer, a document of almost 30 pages that details everything related to the Presidium. The name of the Presidium is extra virgin olive oil from millenary olive trees of Maestrat. And olive trees are considered millenary when at the height of 1.3 meters have a trunk perimeter of 3.5 meters. Its production area is Baix Maestrat region, north of the Valencian community, bordering Catalonia, and with access to the Mediterranean Sea. It's a region with great contrast between the tourist coast and the rural interior. Originally, the olive trees were all over the region, but the tourist pressure and the pressure of other crops and activities trigger the uproot from the coast. Baix Maestrat is a region closely linked to the olive tree, and the millenary trees have survived but subsistence because there was nothing better. The olive trees provides leaves for animal feed, oil for food, illuminate their house. It's a region that cannot be understood without its olive trees. In the photo, we see a traditional dry stone wall that prevents water runoff in times of torrential rains, protects from soil erosion, and allows water infiltration. All this is part of their heritage and the ancient olive trees as well. For this reason, they fought, the producers, for there to be laws that could prevent their uprooting and achieve that these olive trees were considered heritage that it was necessary to protect, like a cathedral or like Don Quixote. The landscape that characterizes the interior of the region is made up of non-intensive production, island of other crop, such as cereal, vines, almond trees, among an authentic sea of olive trees, and the dry stone constructions, is a production that is highly integrated with the environment, adapted after thousands of years, and that therefore has allowed the adaptation of other living beings that enrich the local biodiversity, agricultural and natural. The variety from which this oil is extracted is Farga. The advantages that have allowed its maintenance over the years are the great longevity of the trees, the resistance of its wood to the wind, the resistance of the fruits to falling, and considerable amount of oleic acid. Farga is a variety that was grafted onto wild olive trees. Harvest for the production of millenary olive mineral oil is anticipated of what is traditional in the region to harvest the olives from the tree, not from the ground, and thus they obtain an oil of the highest quality. The production is around 800 to 1,000 kilograms per hectare. It's carried out with brivators and messes. The olives are placed in boxes of 20 kilograms until they are processed on the same day. In 2020, 7 farmers participated who have taken 2,700 kilograms of olives from about 80 millenary olive trees to produce 400 liters of oil. Essentially, this oil has great potential, although with medium-low intensities in all its attributes. It's mild oil of medium fruity with aromas of almonds, apple, floral tones, and sometimes banana. Sweet, bitter, and spicy with medium-low intensity. Very balanced oil and organically complex. The members of the Claude Simon cooperative, under different brands, do the commercialization jointly. The protection of the ancient olive trees from the presidium with the production of this oil has generated a current of interest towards the olive trees as a patrimonial element to protect through their knowledge, which has given rise to tourist activities related to visits to the olive trees, conducting tastings and other cultural activities, music, etc. A turning point in the Presidium was the participation in the script of the film El Olivo. A film, as I have commented, reflects the drama that it supposes and that still supposes in other areas, the uprooting of these olive trees, ancient monuments that produce a unique oil and a singular landscape. For farmers in this area, the recognition of the product as a slow food residuum and their participation in Terra Madre was a great boost to the idea of protecting the olive trees and giving visibility to the plundering that their uprooting implies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor. Actually, this is a very widespread problem. The protection of monumental heritage olive trees is something that poses a problem and needs to be pursued in every country. We're going to have problems with that in Italy too, although our constitution protects specifically landscapes, just like all the other cultural heritage. And we're going now to Apulia, and we have a short video from Apulia, and after that we'll give the floor to a young Apulian olive grower from Apulia again.
A lavoro? Guardare il paesaggio significa salvaguardare la mia identità, quella della mia comunità, quella della mia terra. Le galline fanno parte di questo percorso, di questo processo di salvaguardia. La sputacchina è l'insetto vettore della xylella. Le galline, io mi ricordo da piccola, vivevano dentro gli ulivi e gli anziani ci dicevano che pulivano. Non ho fatto altro che riprendere questa tradizione e speriamo che abbia anche una validazione scientifica su quello che è la guerra alla xylella, salvaguardando il paesaggio e salvaguardando i nostri ulivi autoctoni, senza innesti, senza business di innesti di ulivi OGM che possono cambiare il paesaggio per la loro avidità nell'acqua e dell'acqua e dei trattamenti. Questi sono ulivi selezionati migliaia di anni di storia, che si sono adattati perfettamente a questo mondo. In particolare in Puglia noi ci identifichiamo con gli ulivi, quindi il mio compito è, spero, di trovare la possibilità di realizzarlo più agevolmente nella comunità slow food dei resilienti. Il mio compito è quello di custodire il paesaggio così come l'ho goduto, come ne sto godendo per i miei figli e i miei nipoti. Vedete, sono instancabili, incominciano all'alba e finiscono al tramonto e non fanno altro che togliere tutti gli insetti che stanno sul suolo. Il suolo che incide profondamente la custodia del suolo incide profondamente sulla xylella attraverso l'insetto vettore della sputacchina. Qui, voglio dire, con delle galline che razzolano sistematicamente è molto difficile che la sputacchina riesca a entrare e a veicolare la xylella.
Quindi un'altra esperienza interessantissima.
So here's a another very interesting experience of what you do to protect your olive trees. Now the floor goes to Raffaele Leobilla, who's one of the Apulian producers of the Slow Food Presidium of Italian extra virgin olive oil, where at least 80% of the plants need to be, of the trees need to be at least 100 years. Raffaele also told me that you actually were a cook. So what drove you out of your kitchen to become an olive grower? Well, it was that I decided to go back home to valorize the work that our parents and grandparents had been doing all their lives, and also to enhance the value of what my fellow chefs and cooks were doing, so that I could give them a good ingredient for their dishes. So what's your experience about? Okay, now thinking also of the Spanish experience, now what's your experience now? Is this feasible from a financial standpoint? Can we survive when you need to make plants that are so old productive? Well, we have to. That's part of our heritage, and so we need to protect these plants. It's part of our landscape, and it's part of the history that our grandparents and ancestors have created for us so that we can use it. As my grandfather used to say, our plants have been here for centuries. We're only on our way here. So we don't own them. We don't own these trees. We need to consider them as our companions. So we come and go, they stay. My grandfather said that we should not regard them as a source of revenue, but as living beings. And to me, this respect, valorization, and protection is very important. A wonderful thought, a very nice concept, very similar to what the Native American culture said. So we look at the past that we inherited to transfer it on to the future generations. Yes, I was passionate about this as a child because my grandfather would just take me to where the olives were being harvested. And I am particularly passionate about an olive grove that covers 10 hectares. I love it particularly because it was my grandfather's, then my father's, and now it's mine, and I hope I'll leave it to my son. And this olive grove has an anecdote associated with it. We have a very dear Japanese friend who's also our importer. So he asks me to get a few minutes of intimacy all on his own. Under a millennial tree, he embraces, he hugs the tree and says to us that he can get all the calm and energy and peacefulness that the plant is conveying to him. And this is what we feel in staying in contact with these plants day in, day out. We make a monovarietal olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, the indigenous olive oil of known as Rosa di Antina. Since 2016, we have a presidium that covers this indigenous variety. And also it's a recognition to our quality and the hard work that we do in the field and the good practices that we implement, good, clean and fair. So you're not using any synthetic fertilizers, weed killers, etc. No, absolutely. We avoid using chemicals or weed killers. And you're also part, Raffaele, of the community of the resilient countering the Xylella. Yes, we have created this community thanks to Slow Food in recent months. And we exchange opinions, thoughts, on what can be done to protect our wonderful landscape that is all made of these millennial trees, where we try really hard to preserve the trees, and we are very opposed to the uprooting that we're being imposed, and we are also very much against the new plantations with the so-called resistant varieties. Now, these plants are plants that would require super intensive plantations. And so they are very water intensive, and so we would impoverish the soil and the local resources. We would deplete them. And essentially, our millennial plants have survived with no water at all for years and decades. Thank you very much. You do a very important work, and it's very emotional for us Italians knowing what the situation is like. I would like to say one last thing. Now, all of what is happening, we owe it to the olive growers and our ancestors who've done all of this to leave this immense heritage to us. And we owe it to the future generations, our children, so that we can do something for them. Absolutely. Now we have another video, this time from Lebanon. And again, we are going to leave you addresses so that you can upload videos from the entire network. Francesca Rocchi is receiving many videos, even from outside the Mediterranean area. The video we're going to show to you comes from Lebanon, and it was shot by Roberto Mariotti from Umbria in Italy, who's also a CNR researcher. We are now going to collect videos on olive biodiversity, and that's a project that's starting side by side with our program development.
Good morning. I am Lamis Shalak, a professor of oliviculture and head of the plant production department at the Lebanese University in Beirut, Lebanon. Today I will talk about the monumental olive trees of Lebanon as important patrimony for further conservation and evaluation studies. As you know, Lebanon is part of the Eastern Mediterranean, where ancient olive trees, also known as centennial olive trees or millennial or monumental olive trees, are still standing, growing and producing, and their products are widely consumed by the populations here. The whole country could be compared to a very old grove where 100-year olive trees are found in mixture with recently cultivated ones. The history of these centennial olive trees is associated to Phoenicians who marketed the olive products along the Mediterranean during the Old Antiquity. Actually, clay jars used before to store olive and olive oil, as well as olive oil lamps from the Bronze Age, and stone basins from the Hellenistic period were found in the fortress of Byblos, next to here, and some other villages. Here we are in Pshali, a very beautiful village in North Lebanon, located at 1,300 meters altitude. Pshali village is home for more than 20 millennial olive trees, which are covered by snow in the winter. These trees belong to the endowment, and they are well conserved and promoted by Pshali municipality. Here we can see the famous, fabulous twins, the sister olive trees of Noah legend. The largest remnants of ancient olive trees in the whole Mediterranean, with more than 21-meter foot circumference and a large cavity with a diameter of 4 meters. In the ancient time, this cavity was used to keep horses and cows, and more recently, as a parking for the car. As I said before, the millennial olive trees of Pshali are well conserved and maintained by Pshali municipality. But in other parts of the country, the monumental olive trees are severely threatened because of their increasing ornamental values. Unfortunately, centennials are hollowed up from their original place and sold for landscape. This is very critical, because this ancient olive germoplasm has not been sufficiently investigated or assessed yet. Monumentals might be unknown ancient land races representing most probably early stages of the olive domestication process in Lebanon and the Mediterranean. And one important research question: how did these millennial olive trees survive over centuries to severe climatic change? Undoubtedly, the long lifespan of the olive tree in the Mediterranean makes of these monumental trees excellent candidates for proxy analysis and reconstruction of paleoclimatic conditions of the past. Hence, there is an urgent need to undertake priority tasks for the conservation and evaluation of these important millennial trees. We already know that some of these monumental trees are the ancestors of the traditional land races presently growing in the countries. Other scientific evidence will follow soon.
Veramente degli esemplari incredibili, no? Si
Really
sfuggiva.
incredible trees. You could not tell trunk from roots. That was beautiful. I would like now to leave the floor to Saad Daguerre, who is also a producer and the spokesperson of the Slow Food Farmers for Ecological Olives of Mazar Nubani in the Ramallah district. Is also an agroecologist. Saad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think a lot have been said about olive trees and olive growing. It's not easy to talk about olive tree without some deep emotions moving inside you. Yes, we have been created a group of people. We created so-called the Ecological Olive Growers Group in Mazar Nubani under Slow Food or Slow Olives. And it's we created this actually in order to start thinking about olive orchards management from a different perspective, because like in many countries, we face problems here in Palestine. There are problems linked to us as Palestinians, but there are also other problems because we live in under occupation, and it's not easy to see sometimes when Israel is cut or burn our olive trees. And not only that, now we are in the last stage of finishing the olive picking season now. And sometimes when we press our olives and get the oil and bring it back home in our cars, and we face an Israeli military barrier, and when they discover that we have oil with us, sometimes they just take it and pour it on the street. And just imagine, you wait for 1 year and you harvest your olives, you press them, you get your oil, and then in 1 minute you lose your olive oil. It's not that easy to talk again about olives without deep emotions. But also we have problems which are linked to us as Palestinians and Palestinian farmers. And I think it's not only in Palestine that we face migration from rural areas to cities. And the young generation is leaving their land. And recently, in the last years, olive orchards became like a commodity. So many young people, they start selling their olive fields just to get some money to buy a car or a house or something like that. It's not the same as it was in the past. Our grandfathers and fathers actually were treating olive tree in a different way, because it was the main source of living, main source of income for us, although it was not only olive tree in the olive orchard, because as I saw in many of your presentations, I saw that
it's 20
we have the same traditions, that olive tree was planted not in monoculturing. It was not alone in the field. We had also other sister trees like fig tree, almonds, apricots sometimes, and grapes. So there was a whole philosophy about growing these trees together with olive tree. And also in between the trees, they used to grow grains, and also summer vegetables, rain-fed summer vegetables. So our grandfathers knew how to use rainwater in a very efficient way. One issue that we are trying to do as a group of olive farmers is to keep the stone walls. Again, in the past, it was a shame if the stone wall collapsed during the winter time and you don't rebuild it next spring. But now we notice that a lot of stone walls have been collapsed, and no one is taking care of these stone walls. And this way, we also notice that soil is eroded now, is eroding, and we are losing the soil. And by losing the soil, actually, we lose biodiversity, because we lose plants, we lose biodiversity, and as I say always, that by or with soil erosion, actually, we are noticing life erosion, because if there is no soil, there will be no biodiversity, there will be no life, no source of life, then people will leave the area. So many things actually we are trying to tackle as a group of farmers, and we look for ancient practices, like, for example, in each hectare of olive orchard in the past, our grandfathers used to grow or to plant one carob tree, and now they are some people are cutting these carob trees, and we are losing biodiversity like this. Another issue also, we are trying to preserve our traditions, like in producing olive oil in a traditional way. Like, for example, we have a kind of olive oil, we call it badude. We extract it in a very traditional way, very special way, and it has its own characteristics and own way to do this. We celebrate actually making this or producing this oil. And also we are trying to celebrate olive season, because in the past it was like a celebration. Now people are, especially young people, they even don't like to see that their olive trees are bearing a good yield, enough fruits. Not all of them, of course, but I mean many of them. One of the things that I would like to talk about is the no plowing technique, or zero tillage, that I have been promoting since maybe 25 years, because since then I foreseen that farmers are leaving their land, and at the same time they have no way to plow their lands, because they were in the past they were plowing their land using horses. And I foreseen that people will start using herbicides. So I decided, okay, if people will start using herbicides, then we have to introduce another way of taking care of olive tree. And I started promoting zero tillage without using herbicides. And now we are bringing back again the, I call it the three sister trees together, the olive, the fig, and the grape trees together. This is mainly what we are trying to do, is to prevent the use of herbicides, and to diversify the olive orchard, to make it more feasible, more economically feasible also. Because yes, we talk about olive tree from our hearts, but at the same time, if you don't get enough income from the olive tree, then of course young people will leave. Yeah, this is what I actually wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that what you said prompts us all who've been listening to you to hug you very, very warmly. And in the coming months, we will certainly speak on behalf of your community and help your network. Professor, I would never have thought that there are still wars that come in the way of olive growing. So we wanted to commit to help you. We cannot even think, even fathom how humiliating, how hard it must be to be farmers when a war is raging. So we've been reviewing many difficulties that surround olive groves: urbanization, urban sprawl, the young people living the countryside, intensification, chemicals, and also consumption styles. And we've worked very hard, I have to say, at Slow Food to bring the message to consumers that good quality oil may be more expensive because it brings you a lot more than a regular oil. Now, if you were to make a wish for our network, what would you say? What would you do in the next 6 months to support top quality production? Please remember to open your mic. Makes it unique. So olive trees, which are the trees of peace, have become the trees of war, but they are still what keeps the Mediterranean together. It brings humans and nature together, humans between them together, and it combines aesthetical, ethical values, financial values, and beauty. This is what we need to remember in the months to come. Just remember that landscape is not just a view, it's not a beautiful thing, it's a harmony between humans and the components of nature. And olive trees are across the entire spectrum, from producers to consumers. And as they say in Europe, from farm to fork. Eating is an agricultural act, it's a political act. So we do have a responsibility for consumers and producers alike, and that is to network and to create a community. We can no longer think that the future is about safeguarding the millennial olive trees. We need to do that, of course. And it's not only about luxury olive oil. So we needed to support the culture of olives and olive trees, because that's essential. It's key in our history, past, present, and future, from a community perspective, working together horizontally, vertically, in every direction. That is the kind of work that we need to be doing in the months to come. I absolutely agree. The reason why we're here today is for this cross-country activity. We've managed to meet one another today. We will keep working on this and networking. We don't have time left to answer the questions that we have received on the chat. They will be answered directly to you. The paradox in this pandemic is that we could see others from home. Probably if it had been a conventional Terra Madre, we might not even have met. But that's a nice thing about what has happened, unfortunately. Let's keep this network alive. Let's send our contributions. And I'd like to thank the people who have been working behind the scenes, Nazarena Lanza, Michele Rumitz, and Francesca, and the interpreter. So the idea is that we should stay in touch for this Terra Madre Olive Network, and that has started working together today and will continue to do so. Thank you all.
In our daily food choices, what do we know about what we eat? How do we choose? Where do we buy it? You can make a difference and contribute to a future where everyone has access to food that is good. Eating must be a pleasure for everyone. We all have a right to food that is healthy, natural, fresh, and seasonal. Clean. Being aware helps us to choose food that is good for our health and the health of our planet. Fair. Knowing our food means making choices that are fair to us, to the producers, and to future generations. Slow Food has been working for over 30 years to defend biodiversity and fight the climate crisis by promoting good, clean, and fair food for all. Support Slow Food. Let's act together for the common good. Go to donate.slowfood.com/en and follow us at terramadreselunadelgusta.com.